All right, so here's video for notes 0.3. We're going to complete a table with a function. So in this first problem here, we have y equals 3x plus 1. Our x in the first number here is a -2. So that means my x here I will replace with a -2, which is exactly what I did. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this part of the equation and type it into my calculator exactly how I see it. And look, I got that -5. Now I'm going to repeat this with -1. So instead, I'm going to replace x with a -1, type the equation part into my calculator exactly. Don't use the y. And that's how I get the -2. Repeat that for the 0. And that's how I get the 1. Again, don't type this in. Repeat for the 1, so I have a 1, so I have 3 times 1 plus 1. That gives me 4. And then I can do 3 times 2 plus 1, and that's how I get the 7. All right, so again, all you're doing is these are the x values, you're replacing them, and you can type them into your calculator exactly, and you will get the answer that you are looking for. Now we're going to look at example 2. So in this case, we have our x over here by the 6. So that means I'm going to replace the x first with a -2. So I have 5 minus 6 times -2. And I can either use my please excuse my dear Aunt Sally's or type it into my calculator exactly. Now be careful. This is where your negative sign is. This is a minus sign. Oops. And that's how I get 17 for my answer. Now I'm going to repeat that process again, but this time I'm going to use a -1 inside of my parentheses. And that gives me 5 minus 6 times -1, and that's how I get 11. Then I'm going to repeat that for 0. And I don't know if you guys are noticing a pattern at all when I start filling this stuff into my table here. And when I say a pattern, look at this. How do I get from 17 to 11, like math-wise? That's the same as getting from 11 to 5. I want you to think about that. Now I'm going to repeat the process for a 1, so I get 5 minus 6 times 1, and I get a -1. And then I have 5 minus 6 times a 2, and I'm not going to use my calculator this time, but this I would get a -7. All right, so now let's move on to example 4. So example 4 is when we use a function notation. So let's move this where you can see it. And same thing. So I have 200 times 1/2 x. So I'm going to replace my x here with a -2, which is what I did. Okay. And I can, again, type this in my calculator. So I have 200 times, and then to make a fraction, you go alpha y equals 1/2, scoot it out. And then to have an exponent of -2, this is your exponent button. And that's how I get my 800. Now, I can type that all in again, except this time I'm going to use a -1 for my x. So I have 200 times alpha y equals, enter for my fraction. Get out of my fraction, use the caret symbol, type in your -1. You can also put parentheses around your -1 as well. And you get that 400. And I would repeat that process for all of these. So when I plugged in 0, I got 200. When I plugged in 1 for the equation, I got 100. When I plugged in 2 into the equation, I got 50. Can you guys tell me what you think 3 would equal? All right, hopefully you said 25. Now, I want you to notice that there's a pattern happening here. Getting from 800 to 400, divide by 2. Getting from 400 to 200, also divide by 2. 200 to 100, also divide by 2. 50 to 25, divide by 2. Let's look at this last one here. So now we have -x minus 5. So I have negative, replace my x, minus 5. And I'm replacing my x with a -2. Make sure you use those parentheses or else you're going to make silly sign mistakes. So I have negative, parentheses, -2 minus 5. And I get a -3 as my answer. Now, what I can do You can retype all of that, or I'm going to use a little bit of a cheat. Go back to where I originally typed, and then using my directional pad, hit enter, and then all I have to do is change that -2 to a -1, and I get my -4, okay? I'm not going to write it out on the side this time. So this time I'm going to replace with a 0. So using my calculator, hit enter. I want to replace this with a 0, so I put 0, and then I just delete out that 1, and I get my -5. Again, or you could totally retype it, right? You could do, so this time I have a 1, so I do negative parentheses 1 minus 5. Still works out. And then I replace with a 2, and I get my -7, okay? All right, so do you notice a pattern that's happening here as we go down the table? All right, so go ahead. You can get started on your exit ticket and then work on your homework, or if you need 2 more examples, I will do those with you momentarily.